I like to fish, and sometimes we use worms as bait.
So we thought a visit to a worm farm to see where the worms come from would be a great adventure.
At the same time, Mom asked me to work on a better composting solution for our kitchen scraps.
Turns out our worm adventure was perfect for addressing that too. We learned about all that and more on our visit to Keystone Worm Farms near Lake Keystone in Oklahoma. Owner Tammy Flynn showed us around her operation, taught us about worms, and gave us advice on setting up our own worm habitats.
A good place to start is to explain what a worm farm does.
Of course, they raise worms, and if you buy bait shop worms, they come from a worm farm. But worm farms produce another valuable product.
Worm poop.
Also called castings, worm poop is an outstanding and highly prized soil amendment. It provides fertilizer to plants and microbes to the soil and plant roots. It also enhances soil structure, providing better aeration and water management.
Of how the castings help. So these were all planted at the same time. This had no castings in it, and then up to 1 to 4, which is what we recommend if you're making a potting soil. Add it, the castings 1 to 4 with the soil. And as you can see, it's a huge difference in how they grow. And this is the same, another experiment. This side had castings, this side didn't, and they were planted at the same thing and fed at the same time and watered the exact same amount. So it's a noticeable difference.
It helps with drought tolerance too? Is that what
It does, okay. Yeah. It helps the soil hold water better, absorb water better. It also provides a lot of microbes for your plants, which helps strengthen the roots and protect them against bad microbes and nematodes. And it also works it makes the plant a lot stronger, so it's more pest resistant as well. I really had no problem with pests in my garden last year at all, which was amazing to me because that's always been an issue.
Worm farms sell castings, but they also sell worms to individuals who want to set up their own composting and casting system.
To see how all this works, it helps to know more about worms. So let's take a look.
Here are the key parts of a worm. There's a front end called the anterior.
The back end is called the posterior.
Worms don't have ears or a nose, but they do have a mouth where they take in food.
No teeth, though.
But you will see how they deal with that as we get deeper in. They do have a brain, and though it's very small, it connects to nerves in their skin and muscles that can detect light, vibration, and even some taste. They don't have eyes either, but photoreceptors in their cells can sense light. They don't like light because it means they are above ground where they are vulnerable to drying out and to predators. So when they sense light, they hurry back into the soil.
They not only have a heart, they have 5 of them.
They aren't hearts like our hearts, but they do pump blood through a simple open circulatory system. The food that a worm takes in travels down an esophagus into a crop, which is a stomach-like part that temporarily stores food and meters it into the rest of the digestive tract.
The next stop for the food is the gizzard.
Remember that bit about no teeth? That's why the gizzard is important. The gizzard holds some gritty material that the worm has swallowed, like sand. The grit grinds against the food, breaking it down and making it digestible. From there, the food travels down the intestine, where nutrients are absorbed and transferred to the blood, which carries it to all the cells. The back end of the worm expels what's left over, which are the castings.
He means poop.
There are some structures to point out on the outside of the worm, too. Each of these ring-like structures are called segments, and earthworms have between 100 and 150 of them. Each segment has 4 pairs of setae, which are hair-like bristles. These structures help provide the worm traction and keep it from sliding backwards as it pushes through the soil. And this pronounced band around the worm is called a clitellum. It's located closer to the front of the worm and plays a role in reproduction, which brings us to the life cycle of a worm. It's important to know that earthworms aren't boys or girls. They are hermaphrodites, which means they have reproductive parts for both sexes.
This is obviously the head. This end is the tail. And this little band right here is called the clitellum. And when they breed, they kind of slide by each other and go into each other's clitellum. They're hermaphrodites, so they can be either one. And once they do their thing, they slide apart, and this actually is developing a cocoon. It's very pronounced. You can see it's kind of bulging. So it's about midway through, ready to slough off the cocoon, and the cocoon just sloughs off over their head and falls into the bedding, and they can do that every 21 days. And both worms will have a cocoon.
Okay.
For the night crawlers, there's only one worm in each cocoon, but for the red wigglers, there can be up to 7 in each little cocoon. And I have some cocoons here that you can look at. So these are the cocoons. They almost look like little seeds. And the darker ones are getting closer to ready to be hatched. The lighter ones, they're almost white when they're first produced. And then there's a couple of baby worms in here too. Do you see any baby worms? Oh, there's one. Can you see him?
There we go, yeah. So that would have been hatched.
Just recently. Yeah, probably maybe a week ago. They're actually smaller than that when they're hatched. They call them wisps because they're just like this little, just a little wisp of a thing.
Hatchlings are also called wormlets. They begin eating right away and don't get any care from their parents. Their juvenile stage lasts about 6 weeks, at which point the worm isn't fully grown, but it is mature enough to reproduce. So the cycle starts all over. Worms get full-sized within a year and usually live for 2 to 4 years, but sometimes for even up to 8 years in ideal situations and avoiding predators like toads and birds.
So you may be thinking, what are those ideal conditions? What does a worm need?
Let's explain that by designing our own worm habitat in a 2-gallon bucket. First, they need a medium to live in. This is called the bedding layer. In nature, one example is the layer of wet decomposing leaves and topsoil. We can make bedding out of peat moss, leaves, compost, shredded paper, shredded cardboard, or a mix of whatever of these things are on hand. They need food, which consists of things decomposing on the ground. For us, we can use kitchen scraps. Mostly we will use vegetable scraps, though they will eat paper and cardboard. They can even eat meat and dairy, but we'll avoid those things because they can attract pests. To be protected from the light, the food layer needs a thin covering. We'll use an old rag to cover the top, but it could be anything like a little bit more topsoil or extra compost. Worms don't have lungs, but they do need oxygen. So we will drill holes in the top to allow for air exchange. They absorb oxygen through their skin, which requires moisture, so we want to make sure it's damp.
But not too wet, they can drown.
A good rule of thumb is the bedding should be like a wrung-out sponge. If you squeeze some of it in your hand and lots of water comes out, it's too wet. Finally, they need to be in a good temperature range. They are happiest and most active between 65 and 85 degrees, though they can tolerate a wider range than that. If the soil they are in gets too hot or too cold, they'll burrow deeper, seeking a better temperature. If they don't find it, excessive heat or cold can kill them. If a habitat has all of these things, bedding, food, moisture, air, and the right temperatures, the worms do really well. We added holes in the side of our design so that the worms can move in and out of the bucket. We then buried the bucket in a flower bed and put a lid on it. This gives us another place to feed worms, and they can move through the bed, fertilizing and aerating it. They can always come back to the bucket for food as long as we tend to it. This setup is called a worm tower, and there are several ways to do it. It doesn't have to be super deep because worms usually like living in the top 6 inches or so. They only burrow deeper to escape unwanted temperatures or to find the right moisture.
There are different kinds of earthworms. Keystone worms produces 3 types.
I have 3 different types. I do red wigglers, which are great for composting. Some people use them for fishing, but they're a little on the small side. I do European night crawlers. Those are great composting, but they're great fishing worms as well. And then the third kind are called Indian blues, and I don't have very many of those right now because for some reason I sell out of them as soon as I update my inventory. So they're in the worm bag, trying to increase my population of those so I can start selling them again.
And are they composting or fishing or kind of a combination?
They are not really good fishing worms. They're kind of long and skinny, and so they don't do good for fishing, but they are great composters. A lot of people don't like them because they tend to be a little harder to manage. They like to run out occasionally. If a thunderstorm comes, they might bail. So they are a little harder. The night crawlers and the red wigglers don't do that.
Okay.
They pretty much just stay in the beds. So.
And when people are having a bed, do they normally just stick with one kind, or you can mix kinds?
You
in
can
there?
mix, and that's if you're doing it for composting, that's what I suggest, or to get castings, because these worms are all upper level soil dwellers, kind of leaf litter. They're not on top of the leaves, but they're up close to the top of the soil, and they go up for food. I feel like if you have the combination in there, they hang out in kind of different areas of the soil, and they add different microbiology as they process the bedding and the food. So I feel like the more diverse your biology is that you're getting in your castings, the better your results are going to be.
Miss Tammy showed us how they harvest castings when the bed is ready.
Called it a trommel?
A trommel, That's what this part is down here.
Okay.
And it spins, and it has different size metal. The smaller metal lets just the castings through, and so they end up in this bucket. This screen, the bigger screen, lets the cocoons through, so I can harvest the cocoons out of the bed as well. And then the bigger stuff that doesn't get processed, like these big chunks, and the worms that are in there fall down into the bottom.
And they go back. Yeah.
So it's really a pretty simple process. My husband built this for me, so I am very grateful to him. He is very mechanically minded, and I can just say, I need something to do this, and he fixes it.
Do you remember seeing that at the pecan place? There was something, they have how they sort pecans.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's a very similar thing.
I'm a bit of a mechanic in myself, too.
Are you? Awesome. Well, if my husband comes down, you guys can talk about mechanics. He's actually working up in his home office. And then this is the conveyor, and this is the hopper, and it has an auger in there. So when we get ready, we put a bunch of stuff in here for it to sort, and we turn it all on, and it moves through. So let's grab you some stuff too.
And then I got to try it.
So start scooping them out and sticking them in there. There you go. See, there's worms in there and all kinds of stuff. All right, so you keep scooping, and I'm gonna turn the trommel on and get things started.
Can you show me what this looks like here? All right.
we'll get the combo going. And one thing that's very, very important. When this thing is moving, you cannot put your hands down there. Remember that part. Can you do that? Okay, see that starts spinning. Worms and all of this stuff out and in. Perfect. You could be a worm farmer. I'm going to send you home with your own little worm farm so you can practice, okay?
That'd be awesome. So this material that's in this bucket would have come from this, but as you're finishing. You're calling that harvesting in bed, and because you're thinking castings. Earlier when you were saying harvesting, I was thinking worms, but you're at this point it's both.
I use it in kind of a double meaning, you're right. Okay, at this point, I think we can just dump the rest of the bucket in there. You want to do that? Okay. Dump her all in there. Excellent job. Okay, now what's in there? You see the bumble is making it go down. See it moving the stuff down? Yeah. So then,
These are the castings. These are the cocoons. And this is all the bigger stuff, like the compost and the worms. If you have a small worm farm, you can use a simple screen to shake out the castings.
so you pour some in there and you just shake it. There you go, shake it hard. Perfect. So you're sifting out castings. They're coming out on the bottom. Okay, let's see how we did here. Oh, there's some cocoons. See them right there?
So those have baby worms in them, buddy.
They do. And this is out of a breeder bin, so there's a lot of cocoons in here. And then we have castings down here, and this stuff is ready to go into your plants. Pretty cool, huh?
In addition to our simple worm tower we showed you earlier, we also got a flow-through worm farm made by Hungry Bin. We wanted something larger and easier to care for that can handle more of our kitchen scraps. This one can house up to 16,000 worms. Fully populated and in the right temperature range, it can process up to 4 pounds a day of food. If we don't feed it that much, that's okay. The worms are good at adjusting their population based on their surroundings. That is one reason Keystone Worms uses separate breeding bins to raise worms. Each bin has a target population, enough to produce lots of cocoons, but not too high because the worms would feel overcrowded and not produce as many offspring. The moisture in these bins is also slightly higher because that encourages more reproduction.
About how many worms it's optimal to get the most amount of cocoons per square foot. And so that these have those amounts in there. It can't be too overpopulated because they regulate their own population somewhat. If there's not enough food or the conditions are really bad, they won't breed as much. But cocoons are really strong and they can last for quite a while. They can even be frozen and come back. So that's a kind of a way that they self-preservation for them.
Keystone Worms sells castings in a variety of package sizes, including bulk. They also sell worms. We went home with some worms, but ordered some later online and received those in the mail.
Yup, worms by mail.
We'll post a link to their website in the video description.
Thanks, Keystone Worms, for teaching us about worms and giving us advice on setting up our own worm farms.
It'll be nice having a ready supply of fishing worms right outside our door.
And Mom will be really happy. Not only do we have a better system for composting, but our plants will benefit from the worm castings.
Thanks for following along on our adventures. We hope you find them educational and that they inspire your love of learning. If they do, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing. Your interactions with our videos helps our channel grow, and that makes more adventures possible.
See you on our next adventure!